Hi, I'm Rabbi Phil Cohen. In June of 2025, I traveled to Israel hoping to meet with rabbis and talk with them about their lives in the rabbinate, mainly in Israel. It goes without saying that I've been deeply interested in Israel for as long as I can remember. Its people, its arguments, its constantly shifting present. But this time, I wanted to listen in a somewhat different way. I wanted to hear the stories of Israeli rabbis, why they chose this calling, what sustains them, what they have learned, and what they hope for specifically in the Israeli context. And I was very lucky. I met with men and women from different denominations, different stages of life, different corners of the country. My plan was to visit them in their homes, to sit across from them and talk face to face. Unfortunately, the week I arrived, Israel entered a 12-day clash with Iran. I ended up conducting all of my interviews from my Airbnb on Zoom. Incoming missiles interrupted one interview as my subject and I both fled to shelter. Even on Zoom, however, the conversations, all of them, were rich, revealing, and deeply human. Something unexpected came out of that experience. Originally, I had planned to speak with rabbis all around the world for this podcast. Maybe I still will going forward. But for now, I'm staying with Israeli rabbis. Their stories and Israel's stories are bound up together in very interesting and creative ways, and I find that connection endlessly fascinating. That, then, is what this podcast is about. The lives, the questions, the faith of those who serve the Jewish people, and the God with whom we live in covenant across our shared history. I am Rabbi Phil Cohen, and I am a small part of that story. So my next interview is with Rabbi Sigalit Ur, who is living in Shorashim. She's the second Israeli rabbi I've spoken to who was not educated at Hebrew Union College in the United States. I'm going to ask you, please, to talk about why you decided to become a rabbi, why you decided to go to this school, what the school was like, and we'll go from there. Those questions could take the whole interview, but let's not take the whole interview with those questions. Now, the program at the Shalom Hartman Institute is relatively new, and if I don't know about it, not that I know everything, then it's not known broadly.
Okay, so how did I come to be a rabbi? Almost I could say by mistake. My professional career started out in computer science. I worked in computer science in the Army, few years in the career Army, and then went abroad and went to graduate school in the University of Pittsburgh studying artificial intelligence, and returned and started working in the IBM Haifa research lab. Not in AI, but moving between several projects. Basically, that's what I did for, I think, almost 17 years. But when we moved to live in Shorashim, which is a small community up in the Galilee, that was founded by a group of people from North America, that was the first time really that I'd started attending a conservative synagogue because I grew up in Orthodox synagogues. And I liked it. And since it's a small community, I started taking a more and more active role in the synagogue life, reading Torah and Haftarah, leading services, giving Divrei Torah. And at the time, in Shorashim, there was an educational foundation led by Rabbi Mark Rosenstein, who you've already interviewed, a dear friend, colleague, mentor of mine. And at the time, in the educational foundation that he was running, they had a fellowship program that offered educators in the area an opportunity to sort of intern or be a fellow in the foundation and try their hand at what the foundation was doing. And he offered me a chance to do that, asked me if I was maybe considering a transition from my computer science career to something else.
How was it that he thought to ask you that? It was just in his nature, or you seemed to be inclining in that direction?
Well, since I was active in the synagogue and in the community, I found myself, giving divrei Torah and voluntarily offering all kinds of educational programs for the community members, because our community is lay-led and we don't have any paid staff. It's all volunteer work. And I liked it and thought that it was my job to make my community a better place. And so I tried my hand at all kinds of these things. And I guess maybe Mark saw potential and offered. And I let it go for a year. And then the second year that he offered, I said, maybe that sounds interesting. And I was wary about making the jump. So I asked my IBM employers if I could work half-time and spent the next 10 years or so working a partial job at IBM Research Lab, doing research in computer science, research and development, and the other half working in Jewish education at the Galilee Foundation for Value Education. And there, since it was a small foundation, it dabbled in many kinds of things, facilitating encounters between Jewish American teens and Arab Israeli teens, developing educational seminars for Israeli school kids, taking tours accompanied by Jewish texts to all kinds of historically significant Jewish sites in the area, and many other things. And I liked it so much and got confident enough that after 10 years, I sort of picked up my IBM foot and set it down in the Jewish education square. And I continued to do both feet in that. And at some point, Mark, who by that point was the head of the Israeli rabbinical program at HUC, kind of tossed out casually, why don't you become a rabbi? And I thought, what's the term rabbi got to do with me? And kind of pushed it off. But afterwards, started thinking about it and realized that actually, basically, I was kind of doing some of that work without being called a rabbi. And perhaps I could use some professional study and development in that field. And the second reason was that I really liked the Israeli Rabbis program at Hartman, because when you say to an Israeli rabbi, then involuntarily the picture that most people have that comes to mind is this man with a long beard and a black hat and suit. And it's a very specific kind of rabbi. We're not exposed to the wide range of rabbis that people growing up in the States are. And I thought that it was important to try and complexify that image and demonstrate to people that there are many kinds of rabbis. They can be men and women. They can be from different streams of Judaism, and also that they can see their vocation in several different kinds of fields. Again, I think that when you say rabbi, and this is perhaps true more for North American Jews, usually the immediate conclusion is that you're talking about a congregational rabbi. But the Rabbanut Israelit program, the Israeli Rabbis program at Hartman, specifically aims at diversifying the different vocations that rabbis have, while also educating people to be community rabbis. There's also room given to developing people to be educational rabbis, to teach in various kinds of frameworks, from schools, through pre-army programs, through college programs, through adult education, which is what I do. And also rabbis to work in the public sphere, in NGOs, in government enterprises, and so on, with a view that spiritual leadership is something that is needed not just in the context of the community, although it's very important there, of course, but that it can also find itself in these different places. And so the Hartman program recruits people from all the streams, which is secular, reform, conservative, Orthodox, and also Masorati in the Israeli sense. Masorati Mizrahi, traditional is maybe sort of the way to translate it. Men and women. It's always a difficult job trying to build the cohort so that it's balanced in all these different ways, gender-wise, theology-wise, and so on, or stream-wise, if you can say. And then doesn't try to give them the ability to be a posek.
What's a posek?
A posek is somebody who can answer halachic questions, and not just by opening the book and giving an answer to one of the run-of-the-mill questions, but try to bring in a wide range of sources and some creativity to try and answer a very specific kind of question. That takes a lot of background, and is usually Orthodox rabbis' training is very heavily oriented towards that, and to some extent also conservative rabbis, but the others are not. And as I said, this program is catered to all of the streams. The attempt is more to create a common language between the rabbis coming from different backgrounds, realizing that while Israeli society, which used to be very dichotomized between dati, religious, and chiloni, secular, nowadays, in the past few decades, has become much more nuanced. The gap has been filled with reform and conservative and traditional, and people who are previously religious and people who are previously secular. And so since society has become much more fuzzy at the edges, we should also encourage leadership to be able to meet each other and to appreciate each other's strong points and to cooperate with each other. And so there's an attempt to create a common background.
I'm speaking with somebody who runs an interfaith institute, and I asked, I can ask you the same kind of question. Keep in mind, I was a Hillel rabbi for 6 years in the United States, and one of the important values of Hillel is pluralism. So it's not a question that I'm unfamiliar with. And I was a teacher at a Jewish boarding school in North Carolina for several years. And there too, although they didn't think about it very deeply, the administration, pluralism was one of the elements of its identity. So what you're describing, of course, it can be the word pluralism is also applied, but there's a pretty serious high level of study and seriousness among the students. So I'm wondering how that unpacks when you've got people from 5 different streams, and I imagine some of them have strong theological beliefs that conflict with one another. So how does that unpack?
I think that's what makes it so fascinating, because part of the program is really, part of the resources of the program are the people who join it, who, as you said, have very different backgrounds and beliefs and practices. And part of the fascinating stuff is discovering each other and trying to get at the deep beliefs that stand in the background of all these differences. And sometimes you find out very different and surprising things. I have in mind a conference that we organized a few years ago about weddings. And we thought that it would be interesting to get people from all these denominations together in one room to study about weddings, wedding ceremonies, and prenuptial agreements and all that. And I remember there was, I think in the closing session, everybody was there, and there was one conservative rabbi who tried to argue that because Nisu'in Kedat Moshe B'Yisrael, marriage according to Moses and to the laws of Moses and Israel, creates so many problems, especially in the state of Israel, where we don't have the separation of synagogue and state. You know, it creates problems of agunot, women who are left without a husband and are therefore unable to free themselves for marriage, of siruvei get, of husbands who refuse to give a get to their wives, and so on and so forth. So this conservative rabbi was suggesting maybe we put that aside and invent some new kind of Jewish marriage that would be more formal, but would save us all this complication. And then this very secular rabbi, quite an important one, went up and he was so distraught by this suggestion. He said, but what about Kedusha? What about sanctity? There's something so holy about this connection to this ancient holy ceremony the Jews have been holding for thousands of years. And how can you so cavalierly just toss it aside and propose that we invent something new? And, you know, these two viewpoints seem to be kind of switched from what you would expect. But I thought it was fascinating to see that it's, well, you know, we learn this lesson anew every time, that you shouldn't pigeonhole people and kind of expect a whole list of opinions and ideas from their labeling, but still. And I think really this fosters the possibility of cooperation, which I think in Israel is really not to be taken for granted. And it works. A few years ago, one of our alumni was approached by a couple who wanted him to officiate at their wedding. And for halachic reasons, he couldn't, it was past his red line. And instead of saying to them, go off and the woman has to convert so-and-so in such and such a way or whatever, he said, I can't do it, but my colleague will happily do it. And I will, call in advance and let him know that you're going to be calling him. And so there's this respect. The sort of the motto of the program is Notnim Reshut Ze Laze. Giving permission is not the right word. How would you translate it?
Accommodation, cooperation. Yeah, I mean, I only know reshut as sort of permission, but I understand it needs to be understood flexibly, right? To agree to work together amicably.
To give respect to each other, not necessarily to agree. I mean, we have serious disagreements between us, but to realize that people are coming in a serious, respectful, committed, holy way to their beliefs, and not just easily throw people off because they're Reform or Orthodox or whatever. So in that sense, I think it's really a groundbreaking program.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So I haven't asked this question of anybody, but in thinking after all these interviews, nobody, and I mean nobody, including me, in these interviews of rabbis, has used the word God. So I'm going to ask you in that sense here, this very committed pluralistic program that starts at the outset that the streams are all going to work together, find ways to cooperate with each other. And for me, because of my background, the event in my life that brought me into Jewish life after college was being willingly studying at Yeshivat Or Sameach, Baal Tshuva Yeshiva in Jerusalem when I was back in my early 20s. And the Rosh Yeshiva putting his hand, a very powerful moment, putting his hand on my forearm and saying, "Phil, do you believe in the miracle of Torah Me Sinai?" A topic, an idea to which I had just been introduced in the last few weeks. And I'm not going to say no to the guy, but it's always been the dividing line in my mind between traditional and non-Orthodox Judaism. Now I've gone on longer than I thought I would, and maybe you can respond to the way I put it, or maybe respond to it in your own way. But where does God, revelation, fit into the way these people from different streams all work together?
Again, it's something that I find fascinating, that you would expect the people who come into the program secular and exited secular. There's no attempt by the program, of course, to change people's outlook. In fact, I suspect that would be seen as a failure in some sense. But people who are labeled as secular coming into the program have a widely differing concept of God. Some of them have a strong belief in God, but don't believe that it should manifest itself in any kind of commandment. And some of them are completely atheist and are not. And I'm trying to think, to remember, I completed my studies not that long ago, I guess, by the standards probably of rabbis you've been interviewing, but 7 years ago. I'm trying to remember how much we did discuss God, and I don't think we did a lot. And I don't think that's necessarily because there was a deep disagreement between people, but also because I think for many, many people, God and belief is a very private kind of topic. Perhaps because it's always changing your concept of God. Perhaps because you're not really sure. Perhaps because it's difficult to put it into words. Perhaps because there are periods in your life where you have a very strong faith and sometimes where there's a lot of doubt. I know this period here in Israel is a period where many people are experiencing crises of faith. Many people are angry at God. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a very incoherent answer, but I guess that's because of all these things that I mentioned.
That's fine. I mean, and of course, if you don't have a wavering view of God, in my view, the ideas, to the extent that I absorb them, the ideas of the major Jewish thinkers, Maimonides, Gersonides, Kreskes, Martin Buber, Hermann Cohen, and so on, they say things about God, and so I have some concept of what they say, and sometimes what they say works for me, and sometimes it doesn't. And so I know what you're talking about, but it's kind of out of that framework that I asked you the question. And it's interesting that you're describing, as I hear you, if I hear you properly, that of course God is there, but God is beneath the surface, not on the surface of what you study and what you talk about and how you behave religiously, rabbinically. Did I catch that right?
Yes, I think I would agree to that phrasing. Yes, I think so.
How long was the program?
Well, there are two different kinds of cohorts. The first and the second cohort was kind of a bootstrapping attempt. They enlisted people who already had some kind of background in the rabbinical field, either people who already were ordained rabbis, and there were people in the first two cohorts that were ordained secular, Reform, conservative, Orthodox. And people like me, who, while I wasn't an ordained rabbi, I was doing at the time a PhD in Talmud, and I had, at that point, a quite extensive background in teaching Jewish sources. And as I said, I was very active in the community and so on. We had quite a few very senior educators, several Orthodox women who, of course, could not be ordained as rabbis, but in some senses were performing rabbinical duties, even though they weren't labeled so. And those kinds of cohorts, the first and second, and recently also the fifth that graduated last year. The program was 2 years of 1 day a week, very intensive day of study. And the other cohorts were more traditional type, enlisted people who had less of a background and also were younger in age. And that was a 3-year program, 2 days a week of study, plus some kind of small internship experience as they went along.
Mark Rosenstein persuaded you to go to rabbinical school. You elected the Hartman program. You're ordained. Forgive me for asking and making sure. Your title is rabbi. It's not rabbah or anything like that.
In Hebrew, it's rabbah. In English, I don't know what I would call myself. Okay. I don't have that many opportunities to.
But it's only rabbah because it's the feminized form of rabbi. Is that correct? It's not a diminished title. It's the same title. No. Okay, that's
no. There's this question of between rabbah and rabbinate. Rabbinate is the title that some of my Orthodox cohort members chose for themselves. In the traditional world, it was the title of the wife of the rabbi, the male rabbi. Nowadays, it's sort of taken a life of its own, and now signifies many Orthodox women who have become, either through the regard of their communities or through some kind of official program, Rabbanut Israelit, but there are also nowadays official Orthodox programs that give that title to.
So you graduate, and 7 years ago, and you live in Shorashim, so I presume your work, you do your work in the area of Shorashim. So what are you doing? What are you doing these days?
So primarily I teach. Up until last year, a big part of my work was also co-leading the network of alumni of Rabbanut Israelit, of the Israeli rabbis' Beit Midrash, a network to which we invited also alumni of other seminaries. So basically, we wanted to create a network of rabbis from all denominations in Israel, get them together to learn from each other, like this conference that I described about weddings, create professional connections between them, and so on. So that was part of my job until a year ago when I gave it over to someone else. But I was fortunate enough to be one of the founding members of the network. But basically, my main vocation is teaching. And mostly I teach in various frameworks for adults, either pensioners. We live in an area in the north that is dominated by regional councils, very small villages dotted around the area. And so it's really doesn't make sense to have many things within the village itself. So what happens is every regional council has a system of school buses that go around the villages and collect the kids to go to school. And then they have a second round in which they collect pensioners and bring them to a different place where they can choose from a wide range of courses and sports activities and arts projects and so on. And I've been teaching in several of these in various areas around the region and also in conservative communities around the region. Again, mostly the people who come to these things are the people who are after their kids are grown and they can afford to leave the house in the evening. And mostly what I teach, I try to choose all kinds of existential topics that touch people's hearts through Jewish sources. So for example, in the past 2 years where we've been dealing with this horrible war, I found myself teaching about hope and about peace and about revenge and about Amalek and about comforting the sick and grieving, mourning the dead and topics like that. So each of these, I try to bring a wide range of sources from the Bible all the way to contemporary Israeli poetry. And I also try to bring a wide range of perspectives. And basically what I'm trying to convey, mostly my audiences, by the way, are either secular or on the very liberal side of religious Judaism. And what I'm trying to convey is, A, that Jewish sources have something to say about our lives. I think in Israel, there's a very narrow perspective of the relevance of Judaism. People really connect it very much to the ritual commandments, to Shabbat and to Kashrut and so on. And often don't realize that it has a say in things that concern us as human beings, as family members, as community members, as members of the nation of Israel. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to show people that this is really such a rich source of texts to connect to our personal experiences, to help us mull through the thoughts, the ideas, the dilemmas that we have. And another thing that I'm trying to do is to show that it's not a monolithic tradition, that inherently there are many different perspectives, many different takes. And that while the dominant Jewish voice in Israel is often the militant, the warlike, perhaps separatist, that voice certainly has a decent grounding in Jewish texts, but there are also other texts which speak different voices. And we don't necessarily have to equate Judaism to all these more jingoistic.
That issue, of course, is not unique to Israel, to Israeli Jews. The issue of showing the relevance of Jewish texts to Jews. If I had to take a guess, the percentage, joining a synagogue in America or outside, Chutz La'aretz, is different from the way it works in Israel. But joining a synagogue in America is a big vote in favor of some kind of religious community, being part of a religious community. And I would say, if I had to guess, the percentage these days is I know it's well under 50%. I don't know how low it actually goes. But people who join a synagogue do well, kind of like what you said, I want my son to have a bar mitzvah, my daughter to have a bat mitzvah. Sometimes in one of my synagogues along the way, the synagogue had its own cemetery. And so the rumor was that people stayed in the synagogue well into their old age, so they would be guaranteed a place in the cemetery when they died. And one of my rabbinical school teachers, Eugene Borowitz, was fond of saying that the Bible for most American Reformed Jews was not the Bible, but the New York Times. And the idea of digging into sources and finding not only its relevance, but even more primarily its meaning. There's a deep meaning in the sources that we've just become separate from, is universal. It's not. I'm sure you know that, but it's not peculiar to the Israeli context.
Well, I don't have a lot of experience with the American congregations. As I said, I'm born and bred in Israel, and my parents also were born in Israel. I spent a few years in graduate school in computer science in Pittsburgh, but at the time I was like most Israelis, I guess, and I get my distance from the American Jewish community. So I really don't know a lot about.
Okay, all right. I mean, there is a sort of counterexample. A lot of Israelis, I don't know what the percentages are or anything like that, but a lot of Israelis find their way into synagogues as a way of identifying a community that it could belong to. Anyway, I took for granted something that you don't know, and that's totally fine. But that problem of digging in the sources and persuading people that the sources are valuable is a universal one, and so good. I want to get back to pluralistic, non-Orthodox Judaism in a second, but tell me about your family. You're married. You have kids. Where are your kids at?
Maybe I should start with my parents, because that's also I think part of the story. My parents' marriage was what we in Israel sometimes call a mixed marriage, in the sense that my father is secular and my mother was religious Orthodox.
I thought you were going to say Ashkenazi Sephardi. Okay, yeah.
Well, they're both Ashkenazi, but religiously mixed. And at the time that they got married, this was something that was very out of the ordinary. And so they discussed the topic of kids before they got married, and they decided that their kids would be Orthodox until the age of 18 and go to the Orthodox school system, state-run school system. And then at age 18, they would choose what they wanted to be. So I live here, and I'm an active member of the conservative community here. My brother lives in Hoshaya, which is a neighboring village that is Orthodox. And my younger brother lives in Tel Aviv, in a very secular guy. And then when came my turn to get married, I married my husband, who is also secular. We have 3 daughters. All 3 of them are married. In turn, the oldest is very secular. The middle is traditional in some sense, perhaps. And the youngest is very Orthodox. So again, an interesting kind of spread.
I'm very much enjoying this conversation because your background is so different from the other people I've spoken with, who, as I said to you, either during or before the interview, have also been really interesting, but your background is different. So here you are, you decide to become a rabbi well into somewhere in middle age. I don't want to prognosticate about your actual age. You've been a rabbi for 7 years. Where is Judaism going in Israel? That's a big, big question. You can write dissertations on it. But, from your perspective in Shorashim and the work that you're doing and the education that you have, where do you see Israel going?
Well, the Talmudic saying that ever since the temple was destroyed, then prophecy was given to babes and fools. And I'm certainly not a baby, and I don't want to be a fool. So I don't want to prophecy.
So what are you observing? So forget the prophecy. We'll put new off the table. But you're engaged in, I don't remember if you said you formulated or you took over this vast pluralistic rabbinic network. So you're very smart. So what do you see happening without pulling that there, without taking an oath, without swearing to it?
Well, I think you see a lot more manifestations of many kinds of Judaism in the public sphere and also in private lives of people. For example, and I say this just because I officiated at a wedding a few weeks ago of a neighbor of mine, a sweet girl who made Aliyah from the United States when she was about 8 years old, and who I've known ever since. So she and her husband got married, and I officiated. It used to be when people my age got married, we got married at the rabbanut, at the official Israeli rabbinate. And nobody really looked very much into different kinds of options. You just went and you signed up, and the rabbinut sent you some rabbi, and he went through the motions, and they weren't necessarily very relevant to your life, but that was the official way to do it, and you went your way. In recent years, even though many people still get married through the rabbanut, there is also a burgeoning of liberal rabbis who, of course, when they officiated a wedding, this is not recognized by the state. But in terms of the couples getting married, now they're not looking just to, mark an X in the box. They want their wedding to have Jewish content that is relevant to their feelings, to their families, to their communities. So they actively go look for a rabbi, male or female, who will resonate with their lifestyles, who will then accompany them, usually in a process in which they meet 2, 3, 4, 5 times before the wedding, will get to know them a little bit, who will study with them, who will make sure to make the wedding ceremony really a meaningful part of this milestone in their lives. And while probably the people who look at the official statistics are looking with dismay at the decline of the numbers of Jewish couples getting married in the Rabbanut, I think it's a great sign, because it means that people, also, some people aren't getting married, or are just asking a good friend of theirs to officiate something that has a very loose connection to Judaism. But many, many people really have realized that Judaism has something to give meaning to their private, to their family lives. And this is just, a small symptom. You will hear a lot more echoes of Jewish texts and songs in the repertoire that you hear on the radio. People study texts and fold them into their lives in many kinds of creative ways. On the other hand, you'll also see other manifestations. There's recently a big fight in the school system about kids in the secular school system insisting on laying tefillin at school. And, nobody objects to their laying tefillin at school, but then there's a sort of a peer pressure kind of competition. Who will pressure their peers into laying tefillin? And if you don't lay tefillin, then that means that you're not a Jew. And all this violence and posturing around what is supposed to be a very personal, spiritual symbol, I think. There's a certain tendency to use Judaism in power plays, both in personal fields like what I was describing with the tefillin brouhaha. But of course, a political manifestation is the fight over what goes on at the Temple Mount. The insistence on going up there, praying up there, prostrating yourself up there, trying to sacrifice a goat up there on Erev Pesach, and so on and so forth. In my sense, that really puts me off, because I don't think Judaism should be used in these power plays. I only went once in my life to the Rosh Chodesh prayer of the Women of the Wall. While I, of course, completely agree that is the full right of women to pray at the Western Wall with tefillin, with talit, reading Torah, and so on, I felt personally that this was getting to be more of a demonstration than a prayer. And in my feeling, it was just not an appropriate way of manifesting Judaism. So I think there are these competing forces between the attempt to merge Judaism and nationalism, on the one hand, which I abhor, and the sort of the softer version that is proliferating in all kinds of interesting and hopeful fields, making its way in all kinds of areas of Israeli life.
Did you do any writing in any area of Judaism? Did you do any writing?
No, writing's not my forte. I prefer teaching.
I'm just asking because I'm asking you to send me something that you've written. I saw a reel. I don't remember how it came to my attention in Hebrew, so I'm pretty sure I got it. I had to watch it a couple of times. There were these two kids. I guess they were around bar mitzvah age. They were boys, and they were talking about, and they didn't have, as far as I could tell, they didn't have kippot on. I couldn't see the back of their heads, but it looks like they were bareheaded. And they were debating about, if I got it right, left-handed tefillin, because if you're left-handed, I'm left-handed, so I have a special pair of tefillin. And this jolly Haredi guy comes. He doesn't have a coat on. He's got a big hat and a big beard, and he celebrates the kids putting on tefillin and assures them that there is such a thing as left-handed tefillin. And I couldn't figure out what the point of view of that was, why that reel was made. But you just brought up the issue of tefillin, and maybe it came out of this controversy. I have no idea, but then it is interesting. An interesting video.
Yeah, there have been Haredi guys going around on the trains and offering men the opportunity to lay on tefillin. I was.
That's nothing, Jim. And you go to get any airport in the world, and there's a Chabadnik there ready to put tefillin on. But wouldn't put. Somebody told me if he was traveling with his wife and a Chabadnik asked him to put on tefillin, he would say, "Sure, as long as you put it on my wife as well," and that would always kill the conversation.
Yes, I was a witness to a Chabadnik offering a soldier to lay tefillin, and the soldier was kind of sheepish and said he's Druze. So he said, "Oh, okay, don't bother."
Yeah, I'll have to remember that. I've just been thoroughly enjoyable. I know I said this already. I wish I could be there in person, just talking to you face to face. And next time I come, I will make it my business to travel. I now have 2 friends in Shorashim, so it'd be lovely to go up there and visit.
Come take us about.
And maybe see you teach. Is there anything else that I should have asked that I didn't ask that you want to say?
Well, perhaps one thing that I should have said while I was describing the Rabbanut Israelit was that one thing that struck me during my studies, I think it was, that I went to a funeral of a kind of a distant family member, and it was officiated by a conservative rabbi of that community. And this is quite rare because, in Israel, there's a monopoly of Chevra Kadisha, who's usually quite orthodox. And
what's a Chevra Kadisha?
Rabba Kadisha is basically it's the NGO that handles burial in Israel. I mean, the term Chevra Kadisha has Talmudic roots. And every kehila, every community had a Chevra Kadisha in diaspora too. But now it's been really taken over by these big NGOs that manage the various cemeteries in Israel. There are a very, very few cemeteries that are secular cemeteries where you're allowed to be buried according to your wishes, even if they don't accord with Jewish halakha. I saw this rabbi officiating, and I was so moved by the fact that this basically secular man had known this rabbi. She had known him, and here she was officiating at his funeral, bringing comfort to his family members and so on, who were members of her community. And I thought that really the task of Rabbanut Israelit is that every person in Israel, every Jew in Israel would have a rabbi that would find rapport with them and therefore be able to be there in their meaningful life events. And nowadays, it's just not the case because most of our rabbis are Orthodox. And they may be wonderful people, but they just come from a different world, from a different background. They have different sensibilities from these mostly secular Jews. And so really, I think in order to make Judaism a more meaningful part of the non-Orthodox majority, part of that task is to make sure that there's the spiritual leadership to support that enterprise.
That's a great way to end this conversation, and I think a very astute observation as to the meaning of the rabbinate, probably everywhere. But you, as an outsider, I'm not an Israeli. I don't live here, but it seems like you've put your finger on a very important task that can fall into the hands of this growing group of non-Orthodox rabbis. I mean, Hebrew Union College in the last year or so in Jerusalem graduated their 100th rabbi, and you've now got 3 schools graduating rabbis. The numbers aren't huge, but that kind of task, to the extent that these rabbis take that into their hands, is a way of making Israel a much more humane place than it is. And it's a wonderful way to conclude this conversation. So thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I enjoyed it also. It's always a pleasure to be questioned so that you get a chance to rethink you've been sort of automatically doing. So thank you and good luck. And I'm sorry that you kind of got stuck in this. I hope you managed to step out of your Airbnb from time to time and enjoy a little bit what Tel Aviv has to offer.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and I invite you to stay tuned for future episodes as, with the help of my guests, I continue to unpack the diverse lives that rabbis lead. Special thanks to Steve Lubetkin of Lubetkin Communications for engineering this episode. You can reach me, Rabbi Phil Cohen, at rabbipodcast@gmail.com. Easy enough to remember. Rabbipodcast, one word, @gmail.com. See you next time, and thanks a lot.